Okay, so the title of my project is Will Carry On. I'll get more into the source of that in a little bit, but I think really I should mention it right from here at or from the get-go, the background of it. So it's about North Christian Church in Columbus, Indiana by Eero Saarinen. And I chose that title particularly because there's a lot of threads being woven here in terms of this. So basically what happened is the congregation there, the congregation there unfortunately had to close its doors earlier this year. So there's a lot of things going on here, like they were, particularly like outstanding. They had a lot of like Christ-centered activism and stuff. They were very involved in civil rights for all sorts of groups right up until they closed. And so there's that aspect there and how they deserve to be remembered, and also the building itself, how like just out there and unique it is. And I really stress it. I don't think of it as a memorial. I call it a testament, like to all of those things going on, all of these, like all the great things that it did. And again, because the building is still there, and I'll get more into that in a little bit. So it's like it's not particularly about anything being dead in a sense, like I think some of the other projects are. So speaking quickly about some of the prior to the subject being selected. So this is a audio-visual collage we did earlier. The concept, we were talking about the idea of cities of the dead and whatnot. So this is a audio-visual collage. I skipped through most of the middle of it. But the thing with those ideas, they made me think, what I immediately thought of was my ARC 102 final, the Diane Wells ARC 102 final, which dealt a lot with the industrial decline, the industrial lot in my hometown, as I talked about. So that was what was fresh on my mind, thinking of those concepts. And then you'll see here, another thing that I thought of was an experience I had back in May. I was driving around Southfield with like Metro Detroit, looking at all sorts of architectural stuff that weekend. And I drove past the Reynolds Metals sales office by Minoru Yamasaki. And I had no idea that it was abandoned until the moment I drove past it. So instead of just driving past like I originally planned, I pulled into the lot. And Sam and I just kind of sat there and like I looked at it. I was taking it in because it's like, it's not as monumental as North Christian, but it's still like architect I admire as like modernist, like element of an era in a good way. And it's sitting here on a derelict road in Southfield, boarded up with the windows punched out. So that was just certainly an experience that I had on my mind working throughout a lot of this project. And you can see up here a photographic collage from another assignment similar, also before the selection of the subject. And it's a photographic collage based on architectural conditions, and this hall of mirrors with the core theme being reflection, that comes back into play in the project. So moving on, after the subject has been selected, I put together this, it's called Ghost Chapter, was the name we were given. But essentially it is a collection of the subject and then influence heritage. So mine being a building, I have Eero Saarinen's previous works, himself, and then going back to his father and like his own, and how like that flows into there. And then also some artifacts of my own personal relationship with the church, being like when I first found out about it, preparation for the AIS Columbus trip, and then I go there in March, and it's just unlike any other building I've been in. Like I can confidently say it's my favorite building. And so I felt pretty fitting that it was what I got to do for this project here. And another assignment that was tied to that was another collage project. The whole full video is online. This is just a snippet of it. And this is, it's called a 5-stage collage because the main influence is supposed to be like 5 stages of grief. And this is at the end of it, like the final scene here. And a note about the background music, it's a song called Gianku Lani. It is a 1969 Hungarian space rock song. A lot of the lyrics are kind of concerning the same like death and rebirth, like cyclical nature almost. So that's why I decided to include it with this project. And another precedent study being this case study of the Byzantine fresco chapel, which was an exhibit, like a long-term temporary exhibit in Houston, Texas. And so basically what happened was in the 1970s, in this rural church in northern Cyprus, Turkish antique smugglers cut up and took out these frescoes from the church. And so in return, as a thank you to the philanthropist art collector that bought them from the smugglers on behalf of the Church of Cyprus, the Church of Cyprus then allowed them to exhibit them in this space in Houston for 20 years. And I wanted to take a note. So this is the outside of the building space. And I took note of the fact that it's cagey, it's very monolithic and like a cage, but in a protective sense. It's a very like a guardian almost. So
makes sense.
And then here you can see the immediate surrounding context, with the island being in the middle of the river, the walking bridge, and some photographs, including a thermal shot of the river. So then moving on, going a closer look at the actual project, I want to mention the chronological design progression real quick. I had my original plan was to make it central, a center plane similar to the actual church. But as my idea of how people progressed through this space changed, it ended up becoming more linear. And so you can see there's a 3-stage progression here with the entry patio, which is part of the site, this reflection space being horizontal, and then it flips into this vertical secondary, or not secondary space, but second chronologically space. So guiding you through that, very first you approach the island from this this little walkway that's elevated about 3 feet above the water. The walkway level remains consistent all the way up until this patio here, so same level the whole way through. And when you reach the patio, you can see up here, that's where the spire is, and this is an exact replica of the spire on top of North Christian Church. The concept of it being placed here being that it's a reappropriation of the scale and perspective of it, whereas when it's on top of the church, it interacts with the church form in its own way. But if you then say theoretically, it's a replica, if you then place it here in this context and you're walking under it where there's 10 feet between the walking surface and where the legs meet, that completely changes the dynamic, and being among the legs of the spire produces that, as I mentioned with the Byzantine chapel precedent, this protective cage kind of atmosphere. And then it's also cut away so that the river flows past, and it's more like a relaxing space, outdoor space as well. So then entering into the building here, you pass into the building, and what you're immediately met with is this view of the reflection space. And I call it that because it has the 2 rows of glass on either side. And now, and with the glass being that it's both reflective so you can see yourself, and then also the transparent so you can see the outside world, so it produces that dynamic. And it's tight, it's only about 8 feet from floor to ceiling. It's tight, you want to move through it pretty quickly. It's also that funnel trapezoid shape as well. And so what you have to walk around this sheet of film of water that's falling, again reflective and transparent at the same time. And once you walk around that you pass through this thin about 8-inch wall, this threshold basically, and as soon as you enter into the space it suddenly shifts vertical and you're left with this vertical space. The design was inspired by the worship space in the original church. And you can see the light coming in is either from the windows hidden in the eaves here, or from the oculus directly overhead. And so then a neat thing happens, you're in the space here, and when it comes time to leave, you have to exit out the same door. So then everything that drove you forward now implies, makes you wish to stay. But once you do finally reach the exit door, you can come across and you would see that the title phrase cast into the concrete above the door there, which leads me into talking more about where the concepts of this came from, including the title. So in terms of thinking about the actual form of the space and the 2 spaces, that kind of duopoly going on there, A lot of that comes from like Christian like thinking, heaven and earth, both from the idea this is like the original building was a church. My personal beliefs, a lot of like stuff, kind of layering on top of each other there, and thinking more about the concept of carrying on that I discuss a lot, mentioned in the title. That as I said in the beginning, a lot of threads coming together. The congregation, their legacy, their heritage, their like uniqueness, how much they stood out. And then again, the church building, like how spectacular it was, how like still, even for the time, based on like other large buildings, it's just so different. That's what Saarinen wanted to do, was he wanted to return monumentality. I call it a space age cathedral, is how I like to describe it, because it's basically what it is. It's a modernist, monumental worship space. And so all those threads weaving together with the congregation, remembering them, their legacy, and then thinking about the church building, and how it may have closed for its original purpose, as I had said, but it still has a future ahead of it. It's still there physically. So just kind of thinking of how all those interact. And then the actual specific "will carry on" phrase that mentions another influence. I'm a big fan of My Chemical Romance, so I was thinking a lot. So just where my mind was a lot of these similar themes are from the Project album, The Black Parade, specifically the title track, which is like a summary of the story of the album, and like that's like a triumphant cry in the chorus, and there's almost like a defiant kind of tone to it. So I thought it was pretty fitting to pick that as the title. And so I want to talk a little bit about the materials here. So you can see most of them were inspired by the church, like the North Christian's materials. The site cast concrete, which, as with the original church, is only like a finished material on the ceiling. The ceiling is like a steel structure, like the roof ceiling. It's like a steel structure. The slate roofing, the plated copper as a cladding material for the spire. But the glass actually comes from another source. It's from an experience I had a couple months ago driving on M10 in Southfield. So I was driving in Southfield Town Center, which is like an office complex there. It has like this really distinctive like golden reflective glass glazing. And I was driving at just the right time of day and year to where one of those buildings was reflecting onto the road. And as I drove down it, each time I passed one of those like rays, it kind of like filled the car up with this huge like orange light. So it wouldn't be like the same experience, the same exact like direct reflection, because all except the oculus, all the windows are kind of tucked under the eave, but still the same kind of vibe and interaction of like this sheathed like reflective golden glass. I thought it would be really neat to have. So then moving on to the drawings, mostly for illustrative purposes, but you can kind of get a sense here on this site section of how the two scales of the two objects play together. So of course you have the spire, which from the bottom of the river about here up to the top of the cross at the top is about 144 feet. So you have the tall, slender architectural detail, and then compared to the smaller, mostly horizontal, habitable space. But then you can zoom out, you see the island there, how the scale of the spire then interacts with the island too, and how it has the same role that it did, that does that any steeple does on a church, where it's like a beacon pulling it in.
Yeah, and then it's like, is this a human?
And I do want to mention, I have on here the website, northchristianlegacy.com, which is basically the church's old website. They keep they're working to put a lot like their like own history and like the architecture stuff too up on that website. So go there for more
I
information.
think your guys' exams for the reason that.
Any questions?
Oh, yes, of course.